the fires of hope and prayer, with boundless faith in our destiny, we solemnly declare, side by side we stand, highlands of the blue Caribbean Sea, this our native land. We pledge our lives to thee. Here every creed and race find an equal place, and may God bless our nation. Here every creed and race find an equal place, and may God bless our nation.
Almighty God, most beneficial and merciful, Creator of the universe and embodiment of divine wisdom and light, we come before you with thanksgiving and praise. May your will be done in our nation as it is in the heavens. Please bless our political leader, party officials, activists, and all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Give us the grace to always see good, be good, and do good, and the courage to serve the people. Protect us as we stand against injustice and iniquity, and inspire our endeavors to find the right solutions to the problems that are affecting our fellow citizens. Grant that we may always work together with humility and respect for the greater happiness of all and the honor and glory of our country. Tonight, the opposition leader responds to the in Parliament.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Good morning, members of this Honourable Chamber. I am very pleased today to participate in the budget debate, to have this opportunity to respond, and I thank you for it, on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I intend to attempt to give a voice to the voiceless here in this chamber. And I want to thank all the persons who participated in our pre-budget consultations. We had several of those throughout the country. I want to thank my MPs and senators. I want to thank our staff in the various offices, and I want to thank the opposition staff for their very hard work in helping us prep for this debate. Following upon the minister's 4-hour presentation, a giant wave of despair and anger swept over society's poor and working class sections. The Newsday reporting on reactions to the budget 2023 accurately put it, in my respectful view, and I quote, "Big businesses generally sweet on Imbert's fiscal plan for the next 12 months, while average Trinidadians said the budget left them feeling very sour." Painful is how the Express fittingly summed up the presentation. Very few were spared this budget's wrath. Farmers, trade unions, maxi-taxi operators, petrol dealers, senior citizens, passengers of the inter-island ferry service, the traveling public, mothers, housewives, all have flooded the newspapers flooded the social media and in their own communities with pleas of anguish and grave concerns over Prime Minister Rowley's hateful 2023 budget. I ask the question today, Prime Minister, why does your government brutalize the poor? The poor have feelings too. So come down from there and face the reality. People are suffering in this country, and your budget will only increase their suffering. This budget is a vicious frontal attack on the poor and working classes. It also reeks of classism. Its wicked policies are designed to benefit the P&M upper class at the expense of the poor and working class. Only some greedy, predatory individuals and organizations would genuinely support such policies which heap suffering on the poor and working class. It was so sad to see, post-budget, some fearful persons and organizations praising these measures which bring pain to the majority of the population, and they did so because they feared victimization from this P&M government. The government continues to treat the private sector with contempt and disdain because the P&M weaponizes access to payments, access to contracts, and refunds to instill fear of loss of livelihoods, to suppress criticism. This is the most wicked act to perpetrate against the business community. This budget is also an unnecessary provocation of our poor and working class citizens. There's a seething anger building in the country against an entrenched unfairness being perpetrated against citizens to benefit a few. Our economy is in crisis. Our business sector is heavily polarized, and the SME sector remains severely challenged. International studies, and of course we know from our own experiences, all these report that citizens are suffering very badly. So for 7 years, this minister repeatedly cried that falling energy prices had challenged revenue streams of the country. And that was his justification for the wicked, heartbreaking measures perpetrated over the past 7 years. That was his justification for reduction and removal of subsidies, for including multiple times the raised fuel price, laughing while citizens suffered. That was their justification for not increasing the value of social grants, pensions, public assistance to realistic levels. That was their justification for stalling projects in specific areas, such as schools, preschools, highways, university expansion, hospital, bridges, drainage, road repair, police stations, in every area of life. That was their justification for government's inability to conclude negotiations with unions, offering 0% and 1% and 4% salary increases, even as the cost of living continued to rise. That was the explanation for raising taxes and adding new taxes. So logically, like everyone else, when world oil, gas, and ammonia prices skyrocketed, as it has done in the past 17 months, dramatically increasing revenue, people expected an opposite response, at the very least a softening of the severely constrictive policies government had instituted over the past 84 months. Like the rest of the population, we were hoping for a budget to address the realities in our country. What happened instead, Madam Speaker? The government's reaction was to introduce and raise even more taxes, remove even more subsidies, raise fuel prices yet again, and offer unions almost less than minimum wage. Instead of sustainable measures for growth, development, and an increase in the quality of life of people, their presentation was a long, tiring, misleading diatribe, laced with statistical deceit, bluff, and outright manipulation and falsification of data. Indeed, Madam Speaker, I observed, and you may have observed, that during that long speech, many members on the other side were looking half asleep. It appeared they were falling asleep. And the only time they came to life and appeared to be very elated is when the minister finished, and then they thumped their chest to say, thank God he's finished, he's done, after that long diatribe. Today, I intend to analyze the budget presentation and the budget documents, and to show that this has been an evil act of brutality against the poor and working class. I say, Prime Minister, poor people have feelings too. Withdraw this budget and call an election now. In my response, I propose to provide analytical evidence of the data available to demonstrate what I've said, that this is a brutal act against the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I will do so by firstly looking at a brief overview of the minister's presentation. Then I'll look at the macroeconomic fundamentals and the state of the economy. I'll then look at sectoral details and failed broken promises. I will then look at the ongoing deliberate failure to deliver on promises for 7 consecutive years. I will talk a bit about our track record of unparalleled progressive performance and delivery of goods and services in our term in government. I will also propose some UNC solutions for when we form the next government. I say without doubt, the UNC will indeed form the next government. I turn now to a brief overview of the minister's presentation. Madam Speaker, I will speak at large and in the whole, and my colleagues will develop with respect to the various sectors and present more details. If I take a brief overview of the presentation last Monday, I noted that the minister began by lamenting that on assuming office, he faced challenges ranging from the fall in oil prices, the fiscal concessions my government gave, and the pandemic's effects. The minister, however, did not speak to the fact that unlike most economies in the Caribbean, he inherited from us significant financial buffers, such as foreign reserves of more than US $10 billion, one of the highest in the region. He also inherited as a financial buffer US $5.6 billion in the HSF. While we recognize that COVID affected every economy negatively, the US dollar financial buffers and the low debt to GDP ratio that the minister inherited from us, that is what took us out of the crisis, helped us out. As usual, the minister stated there had been a turnaround in gas production. The minister has been consistently wrong. I think one reporter, Curtis Williams, called him out on it, has been consistently wrong in his projections about gas production. So he talked about a turnaround, giving the impression of full recovery. Minister did not mention, again, that he inherited gas production of 3.8 BCF a day from us, which under his government has shrunk to 2.4 BCF per day. This is what caused the closure of LNG Train 1. Even if all the minister's promised gas production comes in stream, he is still projecting 2022 and 2023 gas production figures substantially lower than what he met when he came into office and we left in 2015. The minister also gave no credit to the fiscal concessions granted by my government, which produced the Juniper field, without which the 2.9 BCF a day that he says is now being produced, that would not have occurred. Nor did he give credit to the Savannah and Macadamia fields, which also came out of our fiscal concessions and which will contribute in keeping output of gas up over the next 3 years. The minister also made much of the renewable energy projects intended to produce 10% of the output from alternative sources. But this is a promise that he had made in 2016. His goal when he made the promise in 2016 was to achieve it by 2021. Yet Monday, this was surreptitiously adjusted to become a reality in 2023. And now even that goal of 2023 achievement is in jeopardy. Nowhere did the minister state how much electricity is consumed in TNT annually. I'm sure that he will be astounded when he finds out, and he will then have to better project what the milestones are to achieving his goals about not using fossil energy, but to have renewable energy. He doesn't tell us about the other projects that will get us there for that goal that he has now for 2023. As usual, it is just more glib speech aimed at fooling the population into believing that the government knows what it is doing. It is very clear the government has no clue about what it is doing. The piece de resistance in his opening was the use of nominal GDP to say that the economy's performance, but we were doing well, and to provide guidance on what is happening. It probably does the minister's ego good to say that he has growth again after 6 years of contraction under his stewardship. However, Madam Speaker, it must be noted, no economist, no minister in the world uses nominal data to evaluate performance and determine the economy's way forward. Was the use of this methodology an attempt to mislead the population? The minister concealed that there would be a deficit in 2022, although he tried to justify this by saying that he had transferred monies into the HSF. It is instructive to note that under my government in 2015, which was an election year, the price of oil dropped to an average of $48 per barrel. The economy had in that year the lowest deficit in 10 years of $2.7 billion. And all this was possible under the guidance of our country's best finance minister, Mr. Larry Hawaii. The minister also did not say that under his negligence, the deficits on a cumulative basis amounted to $32 billion between the years 2016 to 2019. And when 2020 is included, his deficits total close to $50 billion, more than 3 times the level incurred under the government I led. This he and some business chambers call fiscal prudence. How can that be fiscal prudence when your deficits amount to close to $50 billion? It is yet to be explained by them how doubling the deficit is fiscal prudence. In the same way, they still have to explain how moving the debt to GDP level to 88.7% is prudent management and prudent fiscal management. Where is the prudent management in that? The minister made much of the fact that he contained government expenditure, reducing it by up to $9 billion. What he did not say is that this figure has increased, and what is more important is that the reduction in expenditure was achieved by a decrease in capital expenditure, which seriously constrains the productive capacity of the nation. It is also amazing how proud the minister seems to be of the so-called upgrade in the rating outlook by Standard & Poor. Upgrade, the minister said, in the first time in 15 years, Standard & Poor made a change. Madam Speaker, that was not an upgrade in the rating. That was an upgrade in the outlook. And what is more important is the minister inherited an economy from us that was rated A by Standard & Poor, and he has piloted it to just above junk status now. And that has been staved off by a further downgrade, not because of any magic or any plan or policy that he had, but because of the Ukraine-Russia war and the increase in commodity prices. The economy was an investment-grade economy under my watch by both Standard & Poor and Moody's. Interestingly, the minister discontinued showcasing Moody's rating after they showed how poorly he was managing the economy, and they reduced us to junk status. You remember in the past when he was unhappy with the ratings, he said he was going to hire a third rating company. What was it? Fitch. He was going to hire Fitch to do another rating. Whatever became of that, I never heard of that third rating. Maybe the minister will tell us if he got a different grading from Standard & Poor's and from Moody's. The minister continues to lament the cost of the fuel subsidy. That was introduced by a previous P&M administration. But apart from laying the burden on the population, what is his government and what is this minister and his government doing to ease the burden? So you lament each time the subsidy and what a burden it is to the state, and you share it with the population and so on. But what are you doing about it? Didn't just happen. This has been going on for years. My government, again under the guidance of my then Minister of Energy and my then Minister of Finance, we recognized the impact of the cost of the subsidy. And what we did, we began introducing natural gas as a fuel for vehicles. While we acknowledge that the world is going to hybrid and electric vehicles, we have a legacy inventory of over 500,000 vehicles which are petrol-driven and which would benefit from conversion to natural gas. So we recognize that. We saw this as a possible solution to facilitate this conversion, that we realized we would have to have a network of natural gas stations throughout the country. And we set about establishing that. However, another initiative that they killed and did away with, and then now comes to cry about the subsidy without any solution as to how you're going to deal with the high price of natural gas and all fossil fuels in the world economy. I turn now to the state of the economy. This is a very important aspect of any budget presentation. And what I've noticed, Madam Speaker, is that in many instances, the data has been cherry-picked. The data has been falsified to some extent, not necessarily by the minister, and just to try to fool people into thinking, hey, things are great. Remember when the minister told us, I can see clearly now, the minister told us about turnaround. Every budget, everything is going great. But yet the economy has contracted every single year under the watch of this minister. Every single year. One of the most widely used measures of a country's stability and growth is what is known as GDP, gross domestic product. That is the value of goods and services corrected for price increases caused by inflation. When there is economic growth, then your GDP, real GDP, increases. GDP, as I mentioned about nominal before, you can report it in the nominal dollar value of all goods and services. However, nominal GDP is misleading because output value can increase only because prices have increased as opposed to increased production of goods and services. That is why I said nobody uses nominal GDP. The international standard to measure economic growth is real GDP. I believe any attempt to use nominal GDP to compare over the years to claim economic growth is either based on intellectual dishonesty, statistical fraud, or academic professional incompetence.
Member for Superior.
Yes, ma'am.
Some of those words are, in my view, imputing improper motive. So I'll ask you to withdraw those words and find another way to put over what you wish.
Madam, I am guided. I'm not saying the minister has done this. I am saying in my respectful view, if this has been done, that is how I view it in my view. I have not said that the minister is guilty of any of this.
I've asked you to withdraw it and find another way to say it.
Certainly. I hope this doesn't continue for the rest of the morning. So what did the minister do?
As you know, you have freedom of speech within the confines of the standing orders. So withdraw and please
I withdraw
proceed.
the statements. They are not made as against the minister. It's against the use of nominal GDP for growth. I withdraw the statements. In April 2022, The minister used nominal GDP to boast that all sectors grew in 2021. At that time, the minister had data until the end of that 2021 year, and therefore he knew the truth based on the data. But having announced in his 2021 budget statement that the economy would return to sustainable growth that year, the minister used the nominal data, which, as I said, is misleading to be used. Let me share the truth in terms of GDP, which is not being disclosed to the population. Information I downloaded yesterday from the CSO website clearly shows that real GDP had fallen by $37.5 billion between when this government took office and 2021, fallen by $37.5 billion. The last full year that the CSO has data for is 2021. The data also shows that the minister was wrong in claiming that GDP grew in 2021. May I remind Madam Speaker that in calendar 2014, the last full year under my government, our country produced $187.1 billion in GDP, one of the highest in our nation's history. By 2020, real GDP had dropped to $151.1 billion, and in 2021, the CSO stats clearly stated GDP had fallen yet again by another $1.55 billion. Now, I have searched, Madam, to determine where the minister got the figure from and realized that that was his own figure. Since the CSO only has reference to the first quarter of 2022, which showed a continued contraction of GDP. I will ask the minister to tell us that the figure quoted, if he'll give us a source of that data. I say further, Madam, after 7 years and spending about $393 billion, the government still has not been able to generate the level of production in this economy as we did and which he met when he came in 2015. 7 years later, he is still billions away from what he had at the start, and that, in my respectful view, indicates failure on the part of this government. The fact is that far from GDP being the highest ever, the actual figures show that output in TNT has shrunk to what it was decades ago. Under this minister and this government, the country's production of goods and services has collapsed. 1 year ago in this House, the minister announced his prediction for the TT economy, or overall real economic growth, of up to 5%. At the recent Spotlight event, the minister continued his narrative and again claimed an increase in the country's GDP. He claimed the TT economy was enjoying a strong recovery. Ironically, Madam, hours later, the CSO revealed the economy had contracted during the last quarter of 21 and again in the first quarter of 2022. I believe the CSO data, Madam Speaker. As an overall macroeconomic direction, Madam Speaker, the government has no clear policy direction to signal to local and foreign investors where to place their capital. Citizens do not have a clear focus on what sectors will be growing and how to prepare to take advantage of potential growth sectors through education, training, and for employment. Domestic and foreign investors rely on GDP growth as a back-of-the-envelope indicator of economic prosperity in a market when conducting their due diligence on whether to enter, increase investment, or to withdraw. Investors will look on with grave concern at an energy-based economy which continues to record declines in the face of very high prices in the energy sector. Foreign investors will form one conclusion: the environment for business is not favorable, And this is a critical reason why the economy continues to slide downwards under this government. No amount of marketing can mask a failing economy. Worse, the fact that the government continues to misrepresent the facts will not instill confidence in the domestic or foreign investors. I turn to credit ratings, Madam Speaker. Credit ratings, we have used over the years Standard & Poor's rating, and they find that the rating has fallen under this government, as I said before, from an A grade under our tenure to a BBB+, then BBB, and then BB- under the management of this government. In fact, in 2020, the agency downgraded the country to a BB- rating, which it maintains in the July 2022 assessment of Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, S&P made a minor change in July 2022, shifting its projected future outlook, I make the point again, outlook, not rating, to stable, based on expectations of structural developments in the economy promised by the government. Based on that minor change, the minister, as I said, seized the opportunity to claim Trinidad and Tobago is a safe haven for investors, choosing once more to ignore the fact that the actual rating has not improved and that the outlook was not positive but stable, suggesting at best the hope for no further deterioration. On page 37 of his budget statement, the minister told his country, and I quote, as S&P puts it, the stable report reflects the expectations that high prices of key exports will more than offset the impact of lower than expected energy production. Since when has this minister, this government been setting world energy prices? And why is it Standard & Poor of the view that energy production will be lower than expected when the minister boasts in every forum, including last Monday, about increased energy sector production? Why is the the S&P, why are they talking about lower than expected energy production? I'll come back to that in a moment. We look at the Moody's credit ratings. The minister does not mention our ratings from Moody's in his speech on Monday, and we are not surprised. The minister did not tell us that the 2022 review of the economy published by his ministry outlined that Moody's assigned credit ratings of non-investment grades of BA1 and BA2 for 2021. So he wouldn't sing about that, not seen clearly about that at all. In 2022, Moody's ratings have been rebased to a 21 base year, and as expected are unlikely to change substantially since it will be influenced by what is known to be temporary windfall in earnings generated by external market forces. What do these ratings mean? They mean that TNT issues are judged to be speculative and of substantial credit risk. It means that international lenders and investors would note that we fell from an investment grade under this government. We are now at the point where we are viewed as having a substantial risk of default on principal or interest payments for government debt. I turn to Forex, which is another very troubling issue, especially in light of the minister's claims on Monday about the Exim Bank and how much it had achieved. The devil is always in the details, Madam Speaker. Accessing foreign exchange remains a severe challenge, except for a chosen few. In the 2022 budget, the minister boasted that the one-off access to SDR COVID support of US $644 million propped up the failing foreign exchange reserves. Repeated raiding of the HSF would also have added some currency liquidity to the overall figure. However, average users have not benefited from that liquidity. The distribution of foreign exchange remains a carefully guarded secret by this government and the governor of the central bank. However, based on previous revelations by a more forthright governor of the bank, it became clear that certain financial institutions still have first right over available currency from the central bank. These institutions are part of conglomerates earning foreign exchange through trade, forward and backward linkages, and subsidiaries. The central bank has been pumping an average of US $100 million into the domestic economy every month for the last 2 years. And this, the minister tells, he claims, that 114 SMEs out of a total of 136 companies have been able to access US $395 million in 2022. With the greatest of respect, Minister, that figure tells us nothing. Tell us how much of that 395 actually went to these SMEs, because it is likely that the 24 large companies out of that group you talk of consumed the lion's share. So it is not enough to call the numbers, but to disaggregate according to the quantum that each received. Who are these large manufacturers? What business are they involved in? Are they importing raw materials like pasta and ketchup? I asked a question. In this very next sentence, Minister told us that 87 importers got US $488 million. To do what? To supply the nation with food, to supply the nation with pharmaceuticals, to supply the nation with sanitary products, PPE, and what the minister termed other essential supplies. I asked the minister to tell the country whether any of these companies, whether a subsidiary or parent, are part of the same conglomerates receiving foreign exchange under the other head, under both heads therefore. Tell us whether these large companies are also part of the banking sector and have access to foreign exchange there as well. I am asking for a friend, because we all know that the mega company in charge of the pharmaceutical sector in this country is owned by a close associate of the PNM and a friend of the big man himself. And this company is also a manufacturer of food products. So on the one hand, you have the manufacturing sector receiving. On the other hand, you're receiving because you're importing. Now, when the Exim Bank was set up, and I checked it on the website just last night, when the Exim Bank was set up, and up to this last night, it says its purpose is to deal with foreign exchange for exports. So now its mandate has changed, because now you're giving foreign exchange for exports, but also for imports. And therefore, we need to know the breakdown and the companies involved. I challenge you, Minister, if there is nothing to hide, provide a comprehensive list of the companies who have been in receipt of the $883 US million. This, when a friend recently told me his mother was going abroad and went to the bank and he asked, can I get $500 US? My mom is going for some medical attention. And it took a week and they gave him $100 US. The poor have feelings too, you know. Come down from there. The poor have feelings too. It is important to note that in 2015, the total US dollar equivalent of foreign currency sold to the public by all authorized dealers was $7.4 billion. And despite that, even though we sold $7.4 billion, we had the foreign reserves of US $10.5 billion. Under this finance minister, currency sales, foreign currency sales to the public dropped to US dollar equivalent of $4.97 billion as of 2021. So we sold $7.4 billion. They have sold $4.97 billion. I found something strange, perhaps the minister can tell us why this is happening. That while sales of many of the traditional currencies, Canadian, Japanese, Euro, etc., decreased, the sales of Jamaican dollars more than doubled over the period. I can't see why. I come back to saying that access to foreign exchange is a critical consideration for any foreign investor, essentially for repatriation of funds. The reduction in sales is not because of low demand. The reduction in the forex sales is not because there's low demand. The media is replete with stories about businesses, especially small traders, seeking but unable to get foreign exchange. One group, LJ Williams Limited, has been so severely affected by the shortage of foreign exchange, they have been forced to reconsider investments in Trinidad. In the financial report for the period ending December 31st, 2021, they stated, and I quote, "The continued shortage of foreign exchange restricts our growth and has resulted in reconsidering investments in Trinidad for the time being." This story has been replayed in every company in our country, of course, except with respect to those with access. So exactly who have been the lucky few individuals and businesses receiving the billions in US dollars distributed annually? Despite the 30% reduction of foreign currency sales and the hundreds of millions of US dollars sourced from the HSF withdrawals from IMF's SDR allocation and other US-denominated loans accessed over the last few years, the Forex reserves today are at now $6.8 billion as of August 2022. Remember, they inherited over $10 billion from us when they came into office. They have now taken that down as of August 22 to 6.8 billion, which is even lower than it was at the same time last year. Last year's budget, the minister committed to improving this country's pitiful showing on the ease of doing business. We were ranked at 105 at the time. But investors will be shocked to see that in terms of specific constituent parts of doing business, our country was ranked even worse. So to register a property, ranked 158. What was done in the last year or 7 years to address this? Nothing. What is there in this budget to address this? Nothing. Dealing with construction permits, our rank was at 128. Again, what has been done to address this? Nothing has been done. Trading across borders, rank 134. Again, nothing done to address this. Paying taxes. Imagine we were ranking at 160 to pay taxes when I know that the minister was always gleeful and joyful and elated every time he talks about taxes. We ranked at 160. What has been done about this? Nothing has been done. Enforcing contracts, rank 174. Almost last in the world. Again, what has been done to address this problem? Nothing. Only very confused or incompetent persons would believe government made any improvement to the ease of doing business. This rating was discontinued last year, but we didn't need a rating to tell us the horrendous conditions for doing business in the country. 1 year ago, the minister conceded that there was a critical need to take urgent steps to improve the ease of doing business. Once again, on Monday, the minister advised the nation government was putting high priority on improving the ease of doing business. Incredibly, whilst the government is saying through its minister high priority on the ease of doing business, the minister announced 2 initiatives to help with the ease of doing business. One, a website to give online advice on the regulations for starting or expanding a business. The other was to upgrade the single electronic window. That was established years ago, upgraded multiple times, and repeats of being upgraded. This was to facilitate payments for services already administered on the same platform. So there is no real attempt to fix the problems when it comes to ease of doing business. Earlier, Monday, the minister spoke about the creation of yet another new vehicle, a trade and investment promotion agency. And what is this? This is a merger of the functions of 4 agencies, which the government has been spending hundreds of millions for over the years. Just merging all of these. How long is that going to take to bring it all together? How much more are you going to spend to get it going? So the minister boasted now about 78 lots and 5 factory shells to be ready for occupation in January at the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate. Does that sound new? I'm sure we've heard this before. And I wonder who is marketing this, given that the Trade and Investment Promotion Agency is still not functional. You know, talking about creating that and establishing it. The minister tells us that 11 of the 83 options have been committed, and there are only 90 days left to go in this project. The minister is boasting about that. 11 out of 83. In fact, without even knowing Who and what will eventually occupy these premises at Phoenix Park? The minister boldly declares that about 4,500 new jobs will be created whenever the park becomes occupied in the future. What is that, Minister? 4,500 jobs. And I'm reminded, many of us in this house will remember, Minister came and with a repeated broken promise of a elaborate dry dock. Remember that? And told us thousands of jobs will be created. Well, up to today, no dry dock and no jobs. The minister also told us about plywood factory. Remember that? With so many jobs. Again, PNM. Promises never materialize. I turn now to look at public sector debt. And this is a very troubling issue. The escalation in the national debt. And that national debt is not the ministers and the government. No. That debt is to be paid by taxpayers of this country. On Monday, the minister finally recognized, but he dismissed the public concern about the level of government debt and our fear of the country's rapid descent into the debt trap. The minister advised the country, and I quote, based on the current borrowing and repayment schedule, we expect no significant increase in our total government debt in the 12 months between December 2021 and December 2022. Despite these bold utterances, I note the minister chose not to tell the population that he had in fact borrowed $7.3 billion in fiscal 2022. $7.3 billion. Those books, the devil is in the details in those yellow books. And when you look at the estimates of revenue, I think it is either at page 10, Roman 10, or in that yellow book. Borrowed $7.3 billion in fiscal 22. And guess what? Minister plans to borrow another $8.2 billion. $8.2 billion in fiscal 2023 to fund expenditure. Question: when exactly did this borrowing take place? In 2021 and 22. When did this take place? Curiously, I also noted the revised figure for total financing needed in fiscal 22 to fund the deficit was $2.43 billion. Listen carefully. I noted the revised figure for financing the deficit for 2022 to fund the deficit was $2.433. My question then, why did the minister borrow $7.33 billion in fiscal 2022, which is $4.9 billion more than his financing needs? Why? Why did you borrow $4.9 billion more? Where has this money gone? Where has this money gone? This is a very serious issue. You borrow for financing of your deficits and so on. And your revised figure for financing needed for 22 was $2.433 billion. Why then did you borrow $7.33 billion in fiscal 22? You see, it is not enough to come to the Parliament and boast that total debt is unlikely to change during the calendar year. I challenge the minister to explain why he borrowed 200% more than he needed to finance his 2022 deficit. Why? What did you do with that money? Where has that money gone? You have to tell the country. And again, the projection for 2023, the minister boasted that he will have a deficit of $1.501 billion. A deficit of $1.501 billion. You know, on Monday when I did the press interview, a reporter asked me, this is going to be the most balanced budget ever, the closest to a balanced budget. I don't believe a word of that. 1.5, I don't believe it. Because if that is so, again, the minister has questions to answer. Why do you project in your revenue estimates at that same page, Roman 10, in the estimates of revenue, why do you intend to borrow $8.2 billion if your deficit is $1.5 billion? What is that money for? What is that money projected to be used for? That is 4.5 times more than the value of the deficit that you will be borrowing to finance. What is this 8.2 billion projected, or what is it for? The minister owes an explanation. Because for financing, you either have borrowing, or you do finance for deficits, you do borrowings, you do extraordinary receipts like sale of assets and so on. Why are you borrowing 8.2 billion when you tell us that your deficit is $1.5 billion? And on top of that, if my memory serves right, the minister told us on Monday also there'll be some sale of assets. In the revenue estimates, nowhere does it tell us which assets are to be sold. If you're going to sell assets, you must tell the country what assets. It is their patrimony. What are you selling? What are you going to sell? What is the expected amount that you will get from the sale of assets? And then how much, what is that for when you already have finances of 8.2 billion, which is 4.5 times more than the value of the deficit that you project? Something is, the math's not mathsing. Something is very, very wrong here. Once again, the maths is not mathsing. What is this additional borrowing for? Is this to service debt? If so, which debt? What is this for? On the backs of the minister's unsubstantiated 22 projection, the minister also boasted that the government's fiscal consolidation process, defined, and I quote, as revenue enhancement and expenditure restraint, was bringing the country's debt back on a downward trajectory. Or that could be back on a downward trajectory when each year you continue to borrow. Every year you continue to borrow. In 7 years, let me tell you, Madam Speaker, the minister raised our net public debt by 50% over what he found in 2015. 50%! But he's saying we are on a downward trajectory. The minister obviously has a different concept or understanding of what is downward and what is upward. Downward trajectory. Frankly, the minister could come here and talk all he wants about the debt to GDP ratio dropping. The fact is that the public sector debt increased every single year since they assumed office by billions of dollars. Every single year. And this is in spite of raids on the HSF, in spite of withdrawal from the NIF, which totaled TT 21 billion, to fund expenditure which otherwise you would have had to finance through borrowings. So I mentioned, sometimes you have to wonder, people tell me, it's sprung, and so you really have to wonder what's going on. So you're borrowing to finance. You're drawing down on the HSF. You're drawing down from the NIF. You're selling assets. And yet, the money is never enough. You're still with a deficit. The debt continues to rise. Although the country has already paid over $62 billion in debt servicing over the last 7 years. That's taxpayers' money, $62 billion in debt servicing over the last 7 years, because they are borrowing more than they are paying back yearly. As the debt burden rises, they are effectively borrowing to pay debt. That is what it means. They are borrowing to pay debt, which you'll have to borrow again to pay for, and it will continue in a vicious cycle. I'm reminded of a book, The Children of Sisyphus, that they will be pushing a boulder up a hill, and as soon as it reaches a little way, it just rolls back down again. That is what is happening under this government. The 2023 estimates of expenditure place charges on account of public debt, that is debt servicing, at $9.62 billion for 2022. Debt servicing, not paying the debt, no, just a service, 9.6 billion. Do you know what is the estimate for the 2023 for debt servicing? $15.075 billion. So where's the downward trajectory? Where is all this taxpayers' dollars going? Because you just borrow, and spend. You have no clear plan, no policies for growth, for sustainable development, for the creation of jobs. All you do is borrow, tax, and spend with not a care in the world. And so you have pushed our country into debt trap. Instead of frontally admitting the truth, the minister keeps spending money that is not his, putting generations of citizens into debt. And that is the state of the debt packet under this government. I look at the HSF. Minister boasted he put a deposit. Well, that's the first time they ever put a deposit. Eh? But let me tell you what the details are. During the time when they were recklessly indebting our country, they were also drawing down on our ability to repay those debts using our savings. I am advised that net asset value of the HSF as of September 14th, 2022, was US $4.788 million, US $4.788 million. In September 2015, the value of our savings in the HSF was $5.65 billion, 55. So under us, 6.55 billion, US million. Under this government, 4.788.2 million. Over the last 7 years, the fund has generated a solid stream of income. If left alone, it would have been valued at more than US $8 billion. $8 billion. Lending strength to our national savings and international foreign exchange buffers. Instead, the government changed the legislation. Remember, they came to this parliament and changed the legislation. They mismanaged the economy. They facilitated the extraction of US $2.5 billion from the savings in the HSF, almost half the optimal value of the HSF in just 7 years. Took out almost half out of the HSF. That works out to 17 billion TT dollars withdrawn in 7 years. That was money working for citizens by generating millions in interest and dividends annually to add to the total annual value. Total value of our savings. So let me put this in perspective too. Last Monday, the minister gleefully boasted, after 7 years of withdrawing, they finally deposited US $163 million into the HSF. Do you know what that works out to be, Madam Speaker? That works out to the government having deposited in the HSF a paltry 6.5% of what they had withdrawn from the HSF over their term, their 7 years. 6% of what you had in total withdrawn. I make it very clear, during my tenure, in an era of falling prices, recognizing the need for intergenerational savings, my government had deposited US $1.2 billion. Do the maths. We deposited over 600% more than this P&M government. And guess what? We never withdrew a cent from the HSF. What does all of this mean? At the end of the day, it's about job creation, it's about joblessness. I turn now to the issue of unemployment. There remains a significant query about actual employment and underemployment in TNT. Based on NIB reports submitted in Parliament, some 113,000 persons with jobs contributing to the NIB in 2015 were no longer contributing in 2020. What does it mean? Does it mean they no longer have a job? Does it mean they died? What does it mean? 113,000 under my watch who were making contributions to the national insurance come 2020, no longer making contributions. This implies that 113,000 persons were added to the unemployment pool, although this was never reflected in CSO employment data, which reported low unemployment levels. Interestingly, the NIB in 2021 changed the method of calculating the total insured contributors. And this is very suspicious, madam. The net result when they changed the method was that the figures are showing from 2015 to 21, 70,760 had lost jobs, no longer insured contributions. And this raises suspicions. There would be persons who would have dropped out because of death, etc., but new contributors would have also balanced this out. But here we are. If we accept the NIB narrative, and let us not forget the chairman of the NIB is, in our view, illegally handpicked and appointed by this government. According to NIB reports, the total contributors increased by 41,000 from June 2020 to June 2021. This is suspicious, as it would mean in the height of lockdowns and business closures, 42,000 jobs were created. It just doesn't make sense. In the height of the lockdown, the figures are saying, look, 42,000 people are now back on the employment roll. Available CSO statistics also show a fall in the number of persons employed by 54,000 under this government. So that's why I'm saying it is very uncertain from the CSO and from the NIB what the real figures are. I want to make it very clear. This matter of joblessness has received very little serious attention from the government over the last 7 years. My government prioritized the creation of well-paying, sustainable jobs, the creation of new initiatives designed to transform the economy away from the over-reliance on oil and gas, and the creation of training opportunities for students to develop and fill roles being opened up for them. In that 5-year period, we were able to create 54,500 new jobs and to maintain the jobs of those already in employment. And guess what, Madam Speaker? We did that without raising a single tax. In fact, we took tax off the food items, the VAT. We took the tax off 7,000 food items. Not a single tax was raised, and we were able to create 54,500 jobs. Why? Again, it has to do with the strategies, the policies and programs of the then government. It was based on a clear understanding that our citizens want opportunities to earn their livelihoods. They want to work for a living. They want to make a fair income for their work. But this government does not understand that. This government has been directly responsible for the loss of tens of thousands of jobs, from the closure of Petrotrin to the shutting down of state companies, to job losses in TSTT and elsewhere, and soon Wasson, the port and other places. If the minister proceeds with their plans outlined in his budget statement, more job losses to come. The massive level of unemployment also has severe social consequences for current and future generations. Madam, I turn to the impact and the troubling status of the National Insurance Fund, which is that fund to help those in need. People contribute each week or each month, as it may be, so if and when they fall sick, if and when they have to get a pension, that was a contributory scheme that they could fall back upon. Today we are faced with an NIB, which is increasingly challenged because of the falling number of contributors and the rising value of disbursement, So falling numbers of people putting in, but you have to pay out more. Instead of dealing with this matter frontally, the minister's obsession has been to undermine the integrity of the NIB. I ask again, how can a person be a government nominee, representing the minister and his government for years on that board, and overnight he's appointed as chairman when the law requires him to be essentially independent of labor, business and government? Again, political interference, or the semblance of political interference. Same NIB, same national insurance, the decline in contribution income. The suspicion is bolstered by the fact that the NIB reported a decline in contribution income to the tune of 175.48 million to 4.5 in 2021. So the number of contributors increased, but the contribution value decreased by more than 175 million. Do the maths. How is this possible? Until Monday, I come to the issue of inflation as a serious matter which is threatening the lives and livelihoods and survival of the families of Trinidad and Tobago. Until Monday, I thought everyone in this country would agree that prices had risen substantially, whether in transport, hardware items, clothing, entertainment, food. Prices had risen. You could therefore appreciate my amazement when I heard the minister state on Monday, and I quote, "Inflation was kept at bay during the pre-COVID years at the very low level of 1% and has been trending upwards to 4.7% in 2022. Inflation was kept at bay Is this a joke? Are you so out of touch with reality? How out of touch the minister must be to claim that inflation was at bay? And by the way, madam, I believe his entire cabinet seems to be out of touch with reality. When one member who racks up $60,000 in monthly salary, Roman bills in thousands of dollars, drinking almond milk and yogurt, and could glibly speak about sacrifice. Where's the sacrifice? Shame, shame, shame. Another member takes to Facebook to complain about being cut out of a picture in a newspaper. I mean, are you for real? Is this real? Are these the people who are running our country? Are these the people running our country? And then the Prime Minister talks about misbehaving. The only misbehavior I'm seeing is in part of that government, their cabinet, who have totally mismanaged the economy and put our citizens at risk. I tell them, wake up and smell the coffee. Come down from there. Face the reality. And what is that reality, Madam Speaker? If you do shopping for yourself, sometimes you would have seen it yourself. Food items, as I said before, no VAT on them, rose in price by 12.5% in one heartbeat when they put VAT back onto those 7,000 food items. This government presided over several hikes in fuel prices, which caused increased prices in every single good or service with the transportation cost. The cost of manufactured products increased due to increased fees, due to runaway crime, higher costs of imported products, higher duties, and so on. And Mr. Sen, his clueless government, must be the only persons who don't know this. Maybe they don't go shopping for things in the market and in the grocery. They just don't know. I looked at the components of a typical basket of goods used in many homes in this country. I compared the prices of those products in September 2015, which is when I was last there, and September 2022, which is now, or just before. Well, yeah, today is the last day of September. And what I found is that some food items had increased by as much as 90% over the last 7 years. Many of you housewives will tell you, people will tell you, some had increased by over 90%. An economy pack of chicken increased from $33.98 in 2015 now to $44.56, an increase of 31%. If you had a baby, you had to buy infant formula. One of the cheaper brands was priced at $165.41 for a 900-gram package. Now, that has jumped to $223.21 this month, an overall price hike of 34 cents. The price of a 2-kilogram package of rice increased by 48% from 2015 under my watch at $18.21. You know what it is now, madam? $27.02. $27.02. The price of a 2-kilogram pack of flour increased by 50% over the 7 years, from $13.44 to $20.16. Smoked herring with bone raised by 57%. A container of table margarine increased by 90%. Bread, biscuits, soap, salt, onion, garlic, macaroni, all increased in price over the last 7 years. And the minister says they kept inflation at bay. The prices of fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, fish have also skyrocketed. The escalation in inflation and the effect on all goods and services produced is even more critical because the government has refused to settle wage negotiations. So the net effect is what? Salaries of employed persons' wages have been devalued because your purchasing power of your dollar has deteriorated. Your wages have deteriorated because of this inflation. For pensioners, those on grants, this is especially difficult and will have resulted in a substantial fall in the standard of living of the working class the underemployed, and the unemployed. And we'll come to in a moment, madam, the little handouts the minister says he's going to give to help the poor and the people on social grants and so on. I'll come to that in a moment. So it is evident that this government believes its own narrative that the price impact of its policies has been low. This is why they have taken absolutely no action in any way in this budget, including this budget, to deal with the increasing financial burdens that they are placing on the backs of our citizens. Remember the poor. The poor have feelings too. And all of this review of the economy, the state of the economy under this government, can be compared, really starkly compared, to the state of the economy under the government I led. In our 5 years in government, we invested in people, projects, and we could show development in every sector. I ask today, given the state of the economy, which I said you've placed the economy on a deathbed, it's not just unhealthy, it's on a deathbed. What are the measures in this budget to transform and revitalize the economy? Where are the measures for dealing with increased prices, especially food prices? The economy under the UNC-led government moved from minus 4.4% in 2009 to recovery and growth by early 2021. We left the highest levels of foreign reserves ever, US $10.46 billion, with 11 months import cover. We left sizable sums in the HSF, which I mentioned before. And as we're on that HSF, the minister on Monday boasted about putting money into the HSF. But what the minister did not tell us what is the NAV, what is the net asset value of that HSF today. I quoted a number that I was advised it was at a certain level, which means that it plummeted from where it was in 2015. I think the minister must tell the country what is the net asset value of that HSF today and why it has plummeted. There was a report recently that was down by $1.84 billion. Minister, you owe the country a duty to be honest and tell the country what is the NAV in the HSF today. And yes, I think it's only when MP Charles sent a pre-action letter, the minister hastened to come to Parliament to tell us that he had deposited money, but the minister still has not told us what is the net asset value in that HSF. So is that another breach of the law? Are you not supposed to lay a report in Parliament? And would you want us to send another pre-action letter before you do so? I go back, we had a low debt to GDP of 45%. In our 5 years in office, we tripled foreign direct investment in TNT. It was at 500 million when we went into office, and over time increased to 1.5 billion dollars. Since then, under this government, there has been no FDI. Instead, there's outflows, not inflow of FDI, no foreign direct investment coming in, but going out. That's where this incompetent government has taken us. That helped us to we worked to diversify the economy. We grew non-energy real GDP by $6.45 billion or 12%. And that also helped us to shield us from the energy price shocks, the energy price fluctuations. We raised the minimum wage not once, we raised it twice, from $9 to $12.50, and then to $15. And as I said before, we created over 54,000 jobs. We brought the unemployment rate from the 10% we had met down to 3%. That was the work we did. Today I say, without fear of contradiction, we built the economy We improve the quality of life of our citizens, and we will do that again when we form the next government. Now, every year, every budget, there's a segment in the budget statement. And in fact, if you take one budget statement to the other, the table of contents is almost identical. You'll find the same words. And one of these recurrent nightmares is the heading, institutional building. Institutional building. Now, this government has done the most to retard the independence and integrity of institutions. From its control of the central bank, to compromising of the office of the president, the illegal appointment of the new NIB chairman, the interference of the Police Service Commission, the lack of implementation of procurement legislation, and the list goes on. So on the institutional building, the minister lists procurement. Institutional building each year, procurement, recurring broken promises. Every year, promise implementation of the procurement legislation. According to the chairman of the Office of Procurement Regulator, Munilal Lalchan, not Rudal Munilal, Munilal Lalchan. I don't know if they're related. On the 14th of January 2020, the procurement regulator stated that TNT lose a conservative figure of $5.2 billion per year on corruption, which he said could have been used to deliver better health care. But he didn't say it, but better health care and education, but he said it could have been used for schools, settling salary and wage negotiations, for all the goodies in the public sector. This meant that we would have lost $36.4 billion to corruption over the last 7 years, because this government refuses and continues to refuse to implement the Procurement Act that is sitting on the law books since 2015, which my government had passed. But we should have known, because when we brought that bill to Parliament in our time in office, they walked out the JSC. They didn't want to participate in the JSC and so on. So they were never in favor of procurement legislation. It's clear they are still not, because 7 years later, they have failed to proclaim that piece of legislation, and the amounts of monies lost to corruption. Every dollar lost to corruption is a dollar that could feed a child. A dollar could buy textbooks. A dollar could buy laptops. But no, they do not want to do it. So, procurement on the institutional building. As I said, this government has no interest in building independent institutions with integrity. Another repeating promise under building institutions is the National Statistical Institute. This non-performing government keeps making this promise year after year, and this year was no different. In fact, the minister did speak about this one on Monday in his statement. Like a broken record, minister comes year after year, he promises the government will implement the National Statistical Institute since 2016, and again repeated in 2023 budget. I want to spend a little time now, Madam, because the Minister talked a lot about the fiscal measures in his budget presentation. I would like to spend a few minutes on those, because at first glance they appear to be very good things, and yes, in some instances they are, but again, the devil is in the details. First of all, I want to say that government plans to collect from taxpayers $40.5 billion in tax revenue. So out of the taxpayers, they're going to collect, that's their projection, $40.5 billion in revenue from the revenue estimates at page Roman 7 of the estimates book. And they plan to take over $1 billion from the increased fuel prices. Well, what do they offer instead? Some measly fiscal handouts. Nothing in these incentives appear to be part of a comprehensive plan for making specific sectors more competitive, and they just amount to tinkering with the economy. First, The proposed increase in personal income tax allowance amounts to just $4.10 per day. You cannot even buy a doubles, far less a bacon shack. To make matters worse, the minister demonstrated how out of touch he was by stating that this $4.10 increase per day would help offset the increase in fuel prices. But you're taking over $1 billion through increased fuel prices from taxpayers. This is ludicrous, since fuel prices affect the cost of virtually every product or service citizens must purchase. Just as his colleagues chastised citizens for not making sacrifices, they now realize they were never in charge of anything and now they cannot deal with it. The Minister of Finance and his government are also not in charge and they cannot deal with the economy or manage the economy. Another fiscal measure the minister mentioned was the increase in the VAT threshold. And this has a negative effect on businesses who wish to participate in the VAT regime. Instead, the government should have provided enhanced technical support to enable companies to comply and participate in the scheme. This increase in the VAT threshold has two knockout or knock-on effects. It is an insignificant measure, given that companies earning just under $42,000 per month must participate. So this has been increased to a minimum of $50,000 per month. What it means is that companies who will no longer be able to get VAT refunds because they're no longer meeting the threshold will not be able to claim back VAT. So again, the smaller companies are going to suffer. They will not, even though they pay VAT on things, they cannot claim back that VAT. The renewable energy rebate is aimed at the larger commercial farms, not small farmers. Small farmers are not in a position to invest thousands of dollars in solar energy or wind energy, as the case may be. And this is what the renewable energy rebate is for. Farmers are saying you can now apply for a rebate, not for money, for a rebate to build solar plants, wind plants, and so on. They are not good, they can barely make ends meet. And they are the bedrock of sales in various markets. If small farmers cannot do this, so this is aimed at whom? The big farmers, not the small farmers in the country. As for the apprenticeship program, that's a joke. The existing on-the-job training program offers the same service to an even wider group of participants between the ages of 16 to 35. However, government has callously reduced the OJT program by almost 50% instead of enhancing and strengthening that OJT program. So you will see, as of June 2015, when we left office, there was a total of 7,533 trainees under the program, the OJT program. Under this government, as of July this year, they have been reduced to 4,070 active trainees participating. Then when we look at the allocations, there has been a 36 million reduction in actual expenditure for this program. This government decreased from $308 million in 2015, when I demitted office, down to $271 million in 2021. So in two ways, this is a joke, because you have the OJT for a wider pool of persons. You have not been supporting that program. You have been underfunding that program. And now you want to set up another apprenticeship program. I don't think you're serious at all, and this will go the way of all the other promises that have been made. We come to the manufacturing tax credit. Again, I think this is nonsense, if I may use that word, nonsense. No one would invest $5 or $10 million because a manufacturer would get back a $50,000 tax credit. So it doesn't make sense. Further, this will not be of value to companies with tax losses. They will have absolutely no value. The fact that this is a one-time measure will only benefit those companies that have been lucky to be resilient against the onslaught of COVID lockdowns. 6,000 business closures and loss of market opportunities have already occurred. The tax incentives for upstream and deep water production is not going to cause anyone to accelerate their plans for the sector. The incentives in the energy sector will not have a significant impact, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The tax credit for financial providers does not make sense. They require more details in how it will work. Minister says it's to help develop a digital economy. And the minister raised fuel prices again. No concern, as I said, for ordinary citizens. And then he comes with a Mama Guy grant. He said, I'm going to give you a $1,000 fuel grant for persons earning under $7,500 a month, registered at BIR or NIB. And Mr. is saying he's going to give back in total $240 million to citizenry. But he's taking back, as I say, over $1 billion from the same citizenry in return. So you can fill your tank with this $1,000, madam. Maybe you can jump and fill your tanks 3 times the $1,000. And another point, this does not kick in until next year, but the fuel prices kicked in on the very day the minister read the budget. Very day. So I guess you can apply for this $1,000, but let's be reminded that there's still so many people who are waiting on COVID grants. So these applicants will have to jump through all the hoops in order to try to access this grant. I wish them good luck. Another fiscal measure that sounds good on paper, but again doesn't match the reality, is with respect to the GATE program. Minister is promising to expand the GATE program to provide tuition assistance for students who have already accessed GATE at the diploma, associate degree, or lower TVET level to pursue baccalaureate level degree programs. Page 173, Budget Statement 2023. But let's be real, Minister. There has been no increase in the estimates of expenditure for GATE for fiscal 2023. None. So where are we going to get the monies? Are you going to come in on midterm and VIA and supplement and so on? No estimates. So I think this was just a promise to make people feel good. I'm giving out a handout. No money estimated for this, for 23. And that estimate remains the same as it was last year. So where's the increased money going to come from when this increased minister is talking about? How exactly does government intend to fund this expansion of the GATE program? Will they cut back on funding for the current number of beneficiaries, that is to give less of them, to service this expansion? It's another example of government's use, as I say, of clickbait and mamagai to deceive the population. Further, this government has a goal to boast about expanding GATE after they discontinued that program in 2020 for postgrad students, making tertiary education unaffordable and inaccessible to thousands of students. Additionally, under this government, the number of students benefiting from GATE decreased by an astonishing 68% compared to when my government was in office. You've cut the program. You've closed the GATE on so many young people. In June 2015, under my government, there were 59,605 students benefiting from the GATE program. 59,605 students. In 2022, this number has dropped to 40,464. You've closed the GATE on about 19,141 students, and you want us to believe that you are going to expand the GATE program as described in your budget statement. I don't believe you. I do not believe you. The evidence does not point to that. And then the minister in fiscal measures talks about some nuisance taxes to raise revenue, again putting more pressure on already pressured population. I guess the greatest nuisance tax must be what is about the 5th fuel price increase since the government came to office. They have raised the price of gas so many times, fuel so many times, that driving is no longer within the reach of so many persons. Apart from the extra cost to drivers, there are already announcements of price increases by taxi drivers due to the cost of fuel to their operations. The recent reports of food price increases will be updated, as some distributors are already stating that their accountants will have informed that the 13% increase in diesel will result in an increase of 1% to 3% on total cost. So going to put an extra cost on the price of food and other goods and services. Because of this, there will be the expectation of varying food price increases over the coming weeks for all food items. The impact of a further 1% to 3% price increase for food means that a family who would have paid between $1,000 to $2,000 per month in groceries can now expect an increase in costs ranging from $10 to $20 on the low end and $30 to $60 on the upper end, all because of the fuel price increase. This doesn't take into account other things like property taxes and so on. The fuel price increase also hurts our fishermen. Fishermen in Cedros and Otaheite Bay say the recent price hike in gas, diesel, and kerosene will put many of them out of jobs. At Fullerton Beach in Cedros on Wednesday, fisherman Rakesh Ramdas said, fisherfolk were shocked there had been another fuel hike so soon after the last one. He added that fisherfolk may have no choice but to moor their boats and find alternative arrangements. At Otaheite, fishermen also expressed despair and hopelessness. Ramcharan Partap said after the government increased the fuel prices earlier this year, fisherfolk tried to cope by purchasing kerosene engines, which were cheaper to fill. But now, with kerosene also increasing by $1, Partap says they may soon be unable to go fishing. He said fishermen from Cedros and Maruga were facing an even more difficult time, particularly those with gasoline engines. So these incentives, in my respectful view, are a continuation of the mamagai. They can't help themselves, they're just tinkering with no clear thinking or vision and understanding of what needs to be done. These unnecessary fuel price hikes will bring immense pain and suffering to already burdened citizens. The cost to fill up your tank now. I am told that for a 40-liter sedan, for example, like a Tida, using super, this year alone rose from $199 to now $279, an increase of $80 each fill-up. Diesel for 60 liters from $204 to $265, an increase of $61 each fill-up. The monthly bill for the average person who fills their tank once per week will rise from $795 to $1,115 for super, an increase of $320 every month in this year alone. For diesel, it will increase from $818 per month to $1,058 per month, an increase of $240 every month this year. Now we must remember that for drivers using super gas in 2015, their monthly bill would have been $432. Now they're being asked to pay 120% more, or $683 every month. This will bring really severe suffering on an already suffering population. The government must reverse this measure with immediate effect. We call on the government to reverse this fuel price hike with immediate effect. And as we talk about that fuel price and the subsidy, I will now turn, Madam, to some of the sectoral areas. As I say, my colleagues will develop more on those areas. I turn to the energy sector. Minister was very clear that the energy sector is a cornerstone of the community, of the country, and I believe it. It is the economy's engine, and partly because, yes, it is, we used to have a competitive advantage in that area, and also because this government has failed to provide any other revenue streams, so we remain dependent on the energy sector to generate revenue streams, to generate foreign exchange. The global commerce and travel rebound in 2021. The Russia-Ukraine war has led the world into a period of high oil, natural gas, and ammonia prices. These high prices are directly responsible for the increase in revenue government experienced in fiscal 2022. We should note, however, that oil and gas prices in recent weeks have been falling on fears of a global recession. Further speculation surrounding a potential OPEC output cut next week resulted in markets settling yesterday at prices generally below the US $90 per barrel the minister projected. This alone merits a reduction in the target price in the budget. If the government keeps the budgeted oil price at that level, then one can only conclude they're doing so to enable them to raid the HSF once more in fiscal 22. Reuters noted yesterday, and I quote, Brent crude futures settled down 83 cents at 88.49 per barrel, after rising as high as $90.12 during the session. U.S. crude futures for November settled 92 cents lower at $81.23 a barrel. So it would be wise, madam, to temper expectations of windfall extending into 2023. As was made clear by the many graphs presented at the September Spotlight event, even with these high energy prices in 2022, government revenue is not back to 2014 or 2015 levels. The minister based the budget on an oil price of $92.50 per barrel and $6 per MMBTU for gas. While these are the highest price assumptions ever used in preparing a budget, the expected revenue for fiscal 23 still does not equate to what was collected by my government in fiscal 14 and 15, when total government revenue was $58.4 billion and $57.2 billion, respectively. It is reasonable to assume that the minister selected these high price assumptions to avoid having to make deposit into the HSF. Regarding employment in that energy sector, we talk about job loss and a lost decade. Regarding employment in the energy sector, CSO data in quarter 3 2015, we are told that there were 22,500 persons with jobs in the energy sector under my watch. By quarter 1 2022, that figure collapsed to 10,600. In 7 years, a 53% decline in persons with jobs in the energy sector. What a shame, thanks to that P&M government on the other side. So where have these people gone? I am told that many have migrated to Canada, others seeking jobs. Some have found jobs in Ghana and Suriname. And it's a worrying sign of the decay of the energy sector. It just goes beyond the tragedy of the closure of Petrotrain. These are not numbers from the opposition. The numbers I'm giving you are numbers from the CSO in their quarterly labor force survey bulletin. Our energy sector professionals are fleeing the reign of the incompetence of this P&M government and that Minister of Energy. The period 2015 to 2025 will become known as the lost decade of Trinidad and Tobago economy under the energy sector, under the P&M government. In decline, in the contraction, we have seen plant closures, many plant closures under this government. I mentioned the closure of Petrotrain, and by the way, that now 4-year closure of our once proud refinery. What has happened with that refinery? We're supposed to sell that refinery to someone. What has happened? We don't know anything further about it. The last time we heard there was a buyer, then the buyer disappeared. Somebody up in the United States somewhere. So, after 4 years of closure of the refinery, is it now a case of buying scrap iron or old battery buying? The pace of the refinery closure must be prosecuted, and we must get to the bottom of that decision and determine who is the owner of that tragic decision. Who put the light out at Petrotrain? We must come to the bottom of that. Today, in a world of great supply chain uncertainty, we have to import gasoline, diesel, and jet fuels. And so that's the closure from Petrotrin. We also had the closure of the Mittal Steel Complex in 2016. That was the first industrial sin of this government. Then there was the closure of Proman M1 plant in 2017. Then there was the closure of Yara ammonia plant in 2019. The closure of the Titan methanol plant in 2020. And now infamous closure of Train 1 in 2020. Plant closures, shame, shame, incompetence of the PNM government. The closure of these plants has led to the idling of billions of dollars in capital in the energy sector. Idling. These plants are just sitting there. As I mentioned before, related job losses. The mother of all ironies is a Minister of Energy appearing on CNN's Quest Means Business. Quest means business. And boasted that we will ramp up natural gas production to meet a shortfall created by the Russian-Ukraine war. Wow. We reach, as they say, Trini reach. And while the minister was saying that, ammonia, methanol, LNG plants right here in TNT could not get the volumes of natural gas they needed. Train 1 had to be shut down because they couldn't get the gas, and the minister is boasting we're going to supply gas on the world market because of false dreams. The minister is obviously dreaming or is not aware of the reality in the energy sector. And so despite flying to Houston, London, Zurich, The Hague, Doha, and parts unknown over the last 7 years, and meeting with international energy companies, the reality is our natural gas production has not improved but has fallen. The situation would have been much worse had it not been for the natural gas projects I mentioned before that were initiated under the government I led. It would have been much worse. The current level of supply cannot meet the total demand of all customers in the country. And it is for that reason we have had plant closures, understand it? It's not because anybody is wicked or bad mind or anything. It is because your policies and your projects and your programs have all failed to keep the energy sector going. You have failed. Just last week, Ferticon, an international ammonia publication by IHS Markit, reported, and I quote, "The supply of natural gas to industrial consumers in Trinidad is curtailed currently reportedly by around 25%. Curtail, you know what I mean? Cut down. The impact on ammonia output isn't crystal clear, though operations and nutrient plants at Point Lisas are said to have been up and down." Mister, where are you getting this gas? Where are you getting these energy products to sell on the world market? Were you truthful when you spoke to that CNN people on that program? Because you have not the capacity, nor the ability, nor the competence to do so. So in spite of the glowing rhetoric, in spite of the trips abroad, Point Lisas and Atlantic continue to limp along. In the 21-22 budget speech, Minister boasted that oil production was on the rebound. He said natural gas production was improving. He said and I quote, natural gas production would rise to 3.37 billion standard cubic feet in 2022. Nothing is further from the truth, nothing. He then said it would stabilize at 3.60 billion standard cubic feet. All of this is just pie in the sky wishful thinking. The minister comes in 2022, he gives a conservative forecast for 23 of 3 billion cubic feet per day. And given his well-established track record of wrongly forecasting natural gas production, one could assume those numbers he's given are also on the thread. But the unfortunate reality is totally different from the fanciful imaginations of the government. The unfortunate reality is that this government has facilitated the decline of natural gas production. And you know why? Because they reversed the suite of incentives that had been put in place by my government. That's what happened. They reversed it and had no idea what to do except to tinker, as I say, here and there. The PNM is now in its 8th year of government and must take the blame for the condition of the energy sector, especially the unacceptable levels of natural gas production. They must take the blame. 7 years going 8 down, stop blaming Kamala, stop blaming Ukraine and Russia. Blame yourselves for your failure to manage the sector. Last year, the minister said oil and condensate production would increase to 86,000 barrels per day in 2022. Another untruth. I know I can't say lie, but this is another untruth. Did not increase. For the first 8 months of 22, oil and condensate production averaged 59,000 barrels per day. What did the minister say? 86,000 barrels. Average, 59,000. What a big difference. Yet again, the minister is wrong. Last year, the minister bet heavily on the Woodside BHP Ruby project, but that project disappointed greatly, so he didn't get the gas from there. Broken promises on fiscal reform. So what is the problem? Why do we continue to have falling oil production and falling gas production in Trinidad and Tobago? I wonder if those on the other side remember and therefore should hang their heads in shame that we were so blessed in this country to have one of the oldest oil industries in the world, over 100 years old, and you put the light out on that industry. You have decimated the energy sector. You have placed the entire nation at risk because you don't seem to have an idea or a clue of what to do. What is the source of this decline? Talk to people in the industry. Do you talk to anyone? Talk to people in the industry. That's what I do. I am not an energy expert, but I talk to people in the industry. And they will tell you it is all due to what they call above ground factors. All due to what they call above ground factors. The fiscal regime that underpins the energy sector is the main deterrent to the levels of investment needed to increase production of oil and natural gas. It is a fiscal reform that you promised repeatedly and failed to honor. Before 2010, the oil and gas industry told the then Manning administration that there was a need for reform of the fiscal regime. From 2011 to 2015, we met with a lot of the oil companies when we formed the government, and they asked for the fiscal reform. And because of that, we introduced a range of incentives, including harmonizing the SPT, Supplemental Petroleum Tax, increasing cost recovery levels for deep water, and introducing accelerated capital incentives for development drilling and exploration drilling. The accelerated allowances for exploration drilling caused BP to drill 2 exploration wells in 2017. So it was not because of you. It was because of the accelerated allowance for exploration that were given by the government that I led. These wells were successful. One of them, the Savannah well, gave us the Matapal project. The other gave the Macadamia project. And as part of the SIP project, the minister is now boasting and talking about. All that came from the government I led, from under my watch, through a good minister of energy who was knowledgeable in the sector, and by one of the best finance ministers, as I said, Larry Hawaii. So what can this government boast about? What new exploration, what new drilling? None. There's none. And the failure on your part has been that you failed to, well, you did not keep your promises for reform of the fiscal regime governing the sector. Because companies make investment decisions excuse me, based on economics based on net present value, NPV, and internal rate of return, IRR. These three things. Investment decisions are made taking them into consideration. Economics, net present value, internal rate of return. These international companies don't make decisions based on trips to London and Zurich, and as I said, parts unknown. Parts unknown. In the last 7 years, the government has promised in almost every budget to do exactly that, reform the fiscal regime to get more investment. So what did the minister finally do in this budget Monday, or what the minister said he would do? Because so many times things are said and they never materialize. I say PNM promises never materialize. The minister said he will make changes now to the investment tax credit. Of course, again, you have to bring legislation. But so many times we have promised legislation in a budget, and years later the legislation is not brought. So as we say, seeing is believing. So the minister says now he made some changes to the oil and gas fiscal regime last Monday. These changes can best be described as tinkering, piecemeal, and ineffective. First change was a change to the investment tax credit for oil and gas companies, increasing it nominally from 25% to 30%. So you have a 5% increase in the investment tax credit. And it's a tax credit, it's not you're getting money, it's a tax credit. So it's an incentive. This will have little impact on the attractiveness of this incentive and will have little impact on getting in more companies to, oil and gas companies to invest. I'll tell you why. I'm not saying this. I'm quoting Ernst & Young. The publication came out after the budget. I don't know if it's the same Young as Minister Young. Is there any relationship? Ernst & Young has noted, and okay, thank you, sir. Very important. It doesn't change the price of cocoa or the price of oil. They have noted, and I quote, that in order to claim the ITC, the investment tax credit, the development activity undertaken will have to be approved and certified by the minister in the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, the same Minister Young, for the time being. Whilst the enhanced proposal is welcome, this is the same company I'm quoting from, whilst the enhanced proposal is welcome, historically, obtaining such approvals from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries has proved challenging. This change to investment tax credit will have little or no impact. Minister also made changes to the SPT, the SPT regime, and introduced a new SPT arrangement for new oil wells in shallow marine areas, whether in existing, thank you. What is the stop time, please? Thank you. Talking about the SPT regime, there's a fundamental misunderstanding here in this change that the minister proposes. For new oil wells in shallow marine areas, whether in existing or new fields. For new oil wells, first of all, it's only for new oil wells. So how long does it take to get a new oil well going, to explore, to find, to drill, and so on? But that's not the problem that I see here. SPT is not computed on a well-by-well basis. Did you hear that? Minister wants to give you this SPT for new oil wells. But the SPT is not computed on a well-by-well basis. So how are you going to ever get this SPT you're talking about? SPT is computed on the aggregated production of an oil field that is fiscalized quarterly. In other words, you're not going to get it. Talks about wells, but it doesn't work like that. The SPT is calculated, as I say, on the aggregated production of an oil field. So this provision is almost impossible to administer. Secondly, the minister offers new SPT rates on a sliding scale for shallow marine areas. So, for example, the middle band of US $70 to $90. In this ban, Minister proposing an SPT rate of 20%. However, at present, companies producing oil in mature marine areas pay SPT at 33%, but guess what? They get a 20% discount is applied for mature marine fields. So it brings down this SPT to what? 26.4%. 26.4%. So the benefit to companies from this new incentive is only 6.4%, even though the minister is saying that he is going to give an SPT rate of 20%. When prices are in the $70 to $90 range, where they are expected to be most of the time, so it's a 6.4% only. Therefore, this change to SPT regime will have little or no impact. Coming now to changes the minister made to the Petroleum Profits Tax, PPT. With regard to changes in the PPT for deep water, this too is ineffective. This provision will only apply to companies holding exploration and production license. It will have no impact on those holding production sharing contracts. The majority of deep water acreage, I'm told, is under the production sharing regime. So, Minister, it's spinning top in mud. The way of production sharing contracts work, the way they work, the Minister of Energy pays the tax liability of the operator out of his share of petroleum profit. So changes in the PPT really have little impact, and therefore this change is moot. The point has been further confirmed by Ernst & Young in the 2022-2023 budget commentary, and I quote, they say, only companies engaged in petroleum operations under an exploration and production license will benefit, as production sharing contracts typically include a tax indemnity, whereby the taxes of the energy company are paid out of the minister's share of production. Therefore, this change to the PPT regime will have little or no impact. Again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Let us see if these incentives will impact in 2 or 3 years. Indeed, what they have done before 2022 to reverse the significant incentives introduced from 2011 to 15, and what they did was introduce a one-size-fits-all royalty in 2017. That has collapsed drilling and production, and the data bears this truth out. Here's the data. In 2015, the country recorded 2,859 rig days. In 2021, there were just 1,161 rig days. That is a massive 59% decline in drilling, which has ramifications for the oil and gas industry and the maritime services sector in Chaguaramas and Libri. That decline in drilling is the main factor behind the fall in natural gas production by 32% in the same period. That fall in natural gas production caused plant closures, as I mentioned, including the closure of Train 1, for which 10% shareholder NGC, remember that? They blew away $250 million on maintenance when the major shareholders, BP and Shell, opted out of that Train 1. So the fall in oil and natural gas production has everything to do with the incentive structure industry, and the minister has failed spectacularly in that regard. As I said, Madam, I will just do a few points on some of the sectors. My colleagues who are very competent and well-researched will follow up on other sectors. The one I would like to turn to now is the health sector, because that is one of the worst that we have. Healthcare in this country now is at its worst. Before I go there, I want to talk a little about the businesses who are owed all these VAT refunds. So, millions. Value-added tax refunds continue to be a bane to businesses. Despite government claims, there are still large sums outstanding, negatively impacting business activity. And we saw recently, following the budget presentation, business leader Arthur Lockjack, chairman of ABL, They have 6 factories in Trinidad and Tobago. Is reported to have stated the main thing has been the VAT refunds, because when we go into the export market, we are paying VAT and we need to get those refunds back. Lockjack lamented that this withholding of their VAT refunds was a tremendous blow on their cash. However, the minister failed to deal with the government holding on to people's VAT refunds. When speaking at page 31 of his statement, the minister talked about the size of the fiscal deficit, and he stated, by way of example, we were able to pay out $4 billion in VAT refunds in 2022, significantly more than planned. So business owners could be pardoned if they got the impression the minister would have preferred to keep the money, not pay the VAT refunds at their expense, merely to give the appearance of a smaller fiscal deficit. I have repeatedly warned government against using private sector VAT refunds as an interest-free loan. In our consultations, we met and engaged with several stakeholders from business chambers. One such chamber proposed that as a solution for VAT refunds, the government should allow companies to net off the VAT refunds with taxes to prevent them from encountering cash flow challenges. The minister spoke of the amount of VAT refunds being paid, $4 billion, but that is beside the point. The question is just how much, what is the quantum, how many more millions are owed to businesses? Why does the government refuse to give the people their money, give them back their own money? It's their money. They need their money to recover and to grow. What is required of this government is a consistent, reliable process whereby businesses can receive their VAT refunds on time. This is no science for any willing government. And in fact, for this government, with their agenda, yet unable to ensure refunds are paid on time, is a clear indication of their priorities being misplaced. I want to commit today that the UNC government will immediately ensure the full resourcing of the office responsible for VAT collection and processing to eliminate the long wait for refunds which stifle business confidence and compliance. Further, the UNC government will introduce a system which allows businesses to discount the value of VAT up to the value of outstanding refunds from the government with appropriate approvals. This will rapidly clear up the backlog of outstanding VAT refunds while introducing a more efficient VAT processing system. I turn now to national security because we cannot talk about lives and livelihoods without addressing the fact that crime has totally spiraled out of control in Trinidad and Tobago. We see approximately 3,434 persons have been murdered since the PNM assumed office. To date, the murder toll stands at over 442. Daylight killings and drive-by shootings using high-powered weapons are now the norm. During our consultations at Sama, we heard from Mr. Ramchandra Timal, president of the Arangwes Taxi Drivers Association, about taxi drivers being robbed, one person being murdered in broad daylight. Ms. Noreen John, a small business owner from Port of Spain, told us about how she was robbed, her home invaded, and to this day, justice was not served. In every single one of our consultations, the issue of crime, spiraling crime, was raised numerous times. Prime Minister, something has to happen. Something has to give. But in this budget, there was nothing that gave us hope that you have any plans or programs or policies to deal with the spiraling crime. What I can tell you is that your biggest mistake was when you caused Gary Griffith not to be appointed as Commissioner of Police. That's one of your biggest mistakes. I hold no grief for Captain Gary Griffith, but at least when he was there, your crime numbers were going down. And I worked with him, we worked with him, and under my watch, we brought serious crimes down to the lowest in decades by 2014. We slashed them by 2015 by 50% compared to 2009. By 2015, we saw the lowest number of serious crimes reported in this country since 1984. The current situation is critical. It requires urgent attention by government. We expected, as I say, for the budget to bring some hope for citizens, really suffering with the scourge of crime. I turn now just briefly on public utilities, because this is an area there's a lot of buzz and buzzwords taking place and a lot of concern. The minister has essentially said to the country that the funding needed to invest in upgrading the utility sector can only be achieved by raising water and electricity rates. There has been no capital investment in the public utility sector by this government over the past 7 years. Today, they will have you believe that they have the panacea to the problems in public utilities. Instead of investing the patrimony of oil and gas dollars in infrastructure of our country, the taxpayer is now being told to carry the burden of the cost by paying higher rates for water that many of them do not receive, and for an electricity supply many of them cannot depend upon. This plan is a policy document formulated by the government to be sent to the RIC to make a case for increases in water rates. So even though the government denies it, that is your document that you're going to send the plan to the RIC to make a case to increase water rates. What is contained in that document is not surprising at all, but is something government has denied over and over again. On page 53 of that plan is the government's commitment to the RIC. And page 53 of that strategic plan is the government's commitment to the RIC to send home, fire, and put on the breadline, sack, axe, however you want to put it, 2,500 employees of WASA. The joblessness is already so high, and the government is hell-bent, it seems, on creating more joblessness, more unemployment in this country. That is the bottom line of that document as an aim of WASA to reduce the headcount and personnel costs. As I say, more unemployment and more hardships. Madam Speaker, I turn now to infrastructure. Again, in our budget consultations, this was an area that was most bemoaned and complained and lamented about. That issue was one that almost every citizen can agree upon, and that is we have some of the worst roads in the world. This was another central point raised by citizens at our consultations. I shall go on as Mr. Kenny McIntyre. He lamented the deplorable condition of our roads. He said that citizens are now purchasing materials and repairing roads on their own due to neglect by the government and no money being given to regional corporations. Now we get to this new state company. This new company will fix all the potholes and repair all the roads. Well, we wait to see that. In terms of real issues affecting daily commuters, nothing for them. $200 million to set up a new state company for P&M and their friends and family and financiers support board members. On any given day, hundreds of thousands of citizens travel on the northbound lane of the Uriah Butler Highway, Sir Solomon Hocher Highway, and at the same time the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway. Almost 6 hours a day, citizens have to spend sitting down in traffic. How productive do you expect these people to be after they reach to work? They are miserable. They hate everything after suffering in that traffic. So why wasn't there any allocation made in this budget to address that problem? Is the only solution what the Prime Minister said? The Prime Minister talked about work from home and then changed his whole mind about it. He talked about some time ago. Now he's talking about saying, save fuel by not getting caught in traffic and choose a different time to avoid traffic. So how can you do that? How can you do that when you force people back to work into the same routine after you promised a work from home policy and then said, no, cannot happen. In your 2020 manifesto, you promised a work from home policy. PNM promises never materialize. Education, a very important sector. The true wealth of our nation is not in oil and gas, it is in people. And so the issue of sending our children to school was another key takeaway from our consultations. We heard Ms. Gillian Ramsaran from Pache say about how the struggle to send children to school is now overbearing. Maria Pear from Tabaki told us how expensive it is now to pay for transport to send children to school, $50 per day. In Bish, Whitney Pacheco questioned if the ICT access centers will be reopened because children do not have access to the technology. That is what our government aimed to do, give our children access to the world at their fingertips with our laptop program. Now that the visionless PNM has dismantled the laptop program, they cannot even ensure properly functioning ICT centers. Prime Minister, I say again, something has to happen. Poor people have feelings too. The SEA and CSEC level results show students could not cope with the changes of the pandemic. This could have been caught and rectified before the exams if the government had used a data-driven policy approach. That is, if government had been proactive, ensuring our students were prepared during both the online and hybrid systems. About physical opening, information coming to me from sources at the Ministry of Education says the ministry has 350 tickets earmarked for school repairs. However, only 84 have been executed by the start of the school term. That is simply appalling. Is the government allowing our nation's schools to fall into disrepair, like they have destroyed our road network and other infrastructure? How can our children learn in a classroom that is falling apart? And let me remind you, during our watch we built over 100 schools. Can this government point to schools that they built in 7 years? I believe it's 7 schools in 7 years. What else have you done? The high cost of getting back to school, the absence of a proper school transfer system regime, the fact that so many have been unemployed, the rising cost of living have led to some children dropping out of the school system because parents could not afford to send them to school. And what will happen to these children who drop out? Some may be permanently unemployable, others may turn to crime, others may become homeless. So we are creating, in effect, a lost generation. I make a commitment again, when we form the next government, we promise we will make educating the children of our nation a #1 priority again. I turn now briefly to the labor sector. In the labor sector, we know job security is a myth under this government. They boast they kept so many persons in jobs, and yet so many persons lost their jobs. After 7 years in charge, they cannot point to a single project, a single policy, a single development which has created jobs for the people of the nation. Not one single project or policy. In this year's budget, the minister told the public servants, I quote, "We are of the view that our current offer of 4% over the period 2014-2019 for mainstream public service is prudent, practical, and judicious. This is with food prices rising, inflation, fuel prices, property tax, a meager 4%, an insult to the hard-working public service who have kept our nation going. It should now be evident to the working class and trade unions that the policies of this rurally-led government are to undermine, weaken, and completely dismantle the trade union movement. The employment of strategies, devices, and mechanisms, inclusive of closures of state-owned enterprises, Petrotred, privatization, for example, TTRA, and the rampant proliferation of contract labor in the public sector at the expense of permanent and long-term employment are being all utilized. I am very proud to say and remind you that the government I led in a 5-year period, settled over 135 wage negotiations. Madam Speaker, I turn now again to workers. The CPEP program. In 2015, when my government demitted office, there were a total of 11,069 persons employed under the CPEP program. In 2021, under this government, that has dropped down to 9,108 persons. For fiscal 23, there has been no expansion in the program. This is seen in the expenditure estimates. The program was revised downwards from 425 million in 22 to 410 million in 23, meaning more of these workers will have to go on the broadline. We look at the URP, another form of employment, labor. They have cut expenditure by $0.5 billion, 2016 to 2021. For the past 7 years, this government, through its minister, has come to Parliament to appropriate billions of dollars of public monies. They have consistently refused to account for how they were spending the people's monies. And so this new year, we expect the same. We await the debate and the start of the debate. A few words on agriculture, because this is a very, very important sector to drive the economy for revenue streams, of course, and to help us with food security. I have noted that the studies show growing food insecurity in the region due to a lack of production and high food prices. When people say they are not making a living anymore, believe them. When many go to supermarkets, they are forced to compromise and take only the bare minimum to get by. In some cases, because, as we said before, the exorbitant food prices. At our UNC pre-budget consultations in Princestown, Mr. Mahadev Ramnarayan of NAVET, of the Dashin Farmers Association, lamented how difficult it is for farmers who sometimes do not have proper agricultural access roads, no retention ponds, no sluice gates available. He spoke about the lack of technical services from the Ministry's Extension Department for Pest Control, amongst other things. How can we reduce our food import bill if we continue to dismiss the plight of our farmers? Nothing in the budget, definitely, Madam, I've seen, for the scourge of predial larceny. Very small budget allocations for flooding, which destroys so many crops and drive up the cost of local foods. Again, the allocated 300 million that will never be used to benefit farmers. This might be used to buy hampers again. We saw what happened with those hampers and the vegetable boxes. The UNC's plan, Madam, I want to share a bit of this before I close, to ensure food security. Our National Economic Transformation Plan, we place agriculture as a central pillar of our diversification strategy. This would lead to massive job creation and help us reestablish food security with proposed initiatives such as creating agricultural parks with all necessary infrastructure and focusing on local crops, organic superfoods, and non-traditional export crops. Indeed, our plan includes implementing an agriculture insurance protection system to protect farmers from losses incurred through flooding, drought, pest and disease, and predial larceny, fire, and business interruption. We propose investing in R&D, research and development, and encouraging innovation in agricultural practices, processes, technology, and commercialization of new products. We propose working with farmers and the private sector, investors to capitalize on global demand for non-traditional food crops, which offer lucrative opportunities such as hot peppers. And I think last time I spoke, I talked about the fact that we have the scorpion pepper is one of the hottest in the world. I spoke about the fact that peppers, any peppers that you can grow can be easily exported. So that's why I talk about this could be a revenue earner, forex earner, job creation, as well as help us with food security. We propose inviting private investors to establish an agro-processing complex to process the supply from agricultural parks. This will be created through the lease of about 25,000 acres of former carry lands to registered farmers and private investors. There must be a focus on policies that will spur economic growth. Our nation desperately needs innovative solutions in this crisis. I must say a word about Tobago, Madam. I would like to. Not I must, I would like to. The Minister acknowledged that the change in admin in Tobago was a good thing for the development of the island, when he stated, and I quote, "Madam Speaker, I am in broad agreement with the socio-economic agenda advanced by the new administration by the THA in its June 2022 budget statement for fiscal 2023. The Minister continued, "The policies, programs, and activities that have been announced, if implemented properly, will improve the economic well-being and quality of life of the people of Tobago. We anticipate the creation of more jobs in the private sector, as well as the maintenance or preservation of existing businesses and the generation of new ones." End of quote. Madam Speaker, it seems to me that even the PNM seems to be happy that the PNM lost the elections in Tobago. The Minister acknowledged the lockdown measures and closure of the economy would have devastated the tourism industry on the island, and there would be the need to kickstart. Tobagonians are not coming to Trinidad to go to Maracas Beach and rest and relax. They're coming here because there are services and goods which are not provided in Tobago. Notwithstanding the THA's best efforts, they are not in control of the air bridge and the sea bridge. These are controlled by central government. And we have to wonder that this price increase now, whether they're trying to punish Tobago because of their loss in the elections. There have been recent complaints about the number of flights on the air bridge. Citizens have been clamoring for government to increase flights to ensure those who wish to travel to Tobago will have access to the opportunity. The solution this government presented, as I said, was to raise the price, to reduce the demand, without resourcing Caribbean Airlines to be able to increase flights to Tobago. The increase in fares goes against the tourism agenda in Tobago, because a large segment of travelers to Tobago are domestic tourists from Trinidad. Maybe this difficulty to travel between the islands is what the Prime Minister meant when in the heat of the election he stated that he will never forgive Tobago if they do not vote PNM. The increased fares will not encourage persons in Trinidad to staycation in Tobago. Finally, Madam, the UNC's plan to rebuild and restore Trinidad and Tobago. There is no question, in spite of the Minister's false narrative, that we are doing reasonably well. The reality is our country's future is in peril under this government. The UNC is ready, willing, and able to steer our country into calm waters. Our track record speaks for itself. Under the government island, the economy was on a stable growth path. We had initiatives in train to increase revenue generation. And as I said, we created jobs, over 56,000 jobs. We have completed a comprehensive plan to help rebuild the economy and restore stability. The first recommendation we have is, one, reduce tax burden. Reduce the tax burden. We believe reducing the heavy tax burden on our citizens and businesses most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic will help citizens start to regain their footing. I mentioned before about the VAT regime and the fact that we will again remove basic food items from the VAT net and improve the efficiency of the tax system by strengthening the BIR, the VAT office, and customs and excise. We will also simplify the personal corporate income tax regime as well as the VAT regime. Our second booster to the economy, to help the economy to recover, is to jumpstart food security, and I just mentioned some of those initiatives. We believe there must be a jumpstart to our agriculture sector, and I gave some of the plans there. and we commit that we should spend at least 10% of the PSIP to develop the agricultural access roads, irrigation and drainage for agricultural parks. We will also incentivize the private sector to establish an agro-processing plant. There will be no wastage or dumping of produce, which is a bane for many of our farmers. The third strategy we are proposing is to restart petroleum to regain fuel security. We believe government must re-examine its plan for petroleum. We are proposing to restart that refinery. By reopening petroleum, we will have greater fuel security, we will save foreign exchange, we will provide meaningful jobs, and of course we will gain foreign exchange revenue and to continue to contribute to the Treasury. Our fourth proposal is for government to invest in renewable energy. Now the government speaks of it, but it's just lip service and just it never happens. Our initiatives in renewable energy and recycling, such as the establishment of a solar energy park at Tamana, an industrial recycling park across the East-West corridor to reduce our carbon footprint while adding to environmental resiliency. Our fifth economic booster for the economy and its recovery is the creation of 3 innovative funds to mobilize financial resources. We believe the government should now adopt the approach and start the National Food Security Fund, a National Infrastructure Fund, and a National Climate Trust Funds. These funds will not raise our public debt. We recognize that the citizens of TNT are critical to achieving our goal of recovery, sustainable growth, and diversification. Our plan is built on 3 interconnected principles. Principle 1, people-centered development, getting people back to work. Most important, getting people back to work. Principle 2, pro-business, allow the private sector to drive growth and development. Principle 3 is resilience, deepen economic reforms, but with a human face. Principle 4, local content, give people a sense of ownership and independence. Principle 5, sustainability, promoting environmental stewardship. And so the UNC's National Economic Transformation Plan lays out a comprehensive suite of policy initiatives and programs to steer our economy towards a more sustainable development path. Our plan, again, is to create more jobs, to focus heavily on diversification and new business development so that people across the country will benefit. The plan has diversification and prosperity engines. With the economy in sharp decline, we must focus on new revenue generation schemes, deals and programs. We cannot continue to put all the eggs in the energy basket given the volatility of this sector. We have identified several prosperity engines to create new jobs, transform the economy, and create more revenue. 1, a Brechin-Castle agro-processing complex. 2, a sugar manufacturing facility. 3, an East-West biotechnology manufacturing corridor. 4, Sevilla Digital Innovation Park. 5, Tamana Solar Tech Renewable Energy. West Port of Spain Trini Creative Arts Street Area. East Port of Spain Steel Pan Manufacturing Facility. 8, Piarco Aircraft Maintenance Repair and Operations Hub. 9, Cedrus Moruga Southwest Peninsula Economic Zone. 10, Point Galeota Energy Logistics Hub. 11, Plymouth International Cruise Ship Complex. 12, make Tobago a duty-free zone. and the Port of Spain port revitalization. These prosperity engines will mobilize and engage the private sector, both local and international, and their implementation will have large positive multiplier effects in kickstarting the economy. What is needed is a government and a leader who will put their shoulders to the wheel, a government that will see private sector and stakeholders as partners in the process of development. We recently marked our nation's 60th anniversary of independence, our 46th anniversary of a republic. We made significant progress on our journey, but successive PNM administrations have stymied further development. This latest PNM administration has been the worst in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot go on this way. Our country and people deserve better. We deserve a government that cares about citizens, that will take decisive action to improve circumstances. I repeat that the UNC is ready to get to work to rebuild and restore our nation. Some of these programs I've mentioned for economic transformation and recovery and rebuilding, I have mentioned before, and I still believe that they are very viable and workable and definitely in need. The budget will do nothing but work against the people of our nation, condemning them to hopelessness, to a cycle of poverty, to joblessness, some to criminality, violence, and despair. To citizens of this great land, the salt of the earth, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, I say take heart and have faith, for as sure as the day follows the darkest night, the sun shall and must always rise again. I know we are experiencing very difficult times, and as a result of this failed budget, it is going to get even worse. In times of crisis, I often think back to the comforting words of my mother, who would always remind me that everything in life is temporary, even troubles, and that too shall pass. So please have faith. This too shall pass. Soon these 7 years will be nothing more than a bad memory. I will never give up on the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and I ask you, please do not give up on our nation. It was a great freedom fighter, Mahatma Gandhi, who said, and I repeat, when I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall. Prime Minister, I ask, why do you continue your government to brutalize the poor? Poor people have feelings too. I again call upon you, withdraw this wicked budget and call the election now. I thank you very much, Madam Speaker.